Welcome back, everybody. So today we are testing the new Storm IQ Tour 78U. You're probably wondering why we have these two balls here, but let's kind of get into it.
If you like what we do, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe and check us out on Patreon.
You're probably wondering why we have these two balls here, but let's kind of get into it. First impression of this ball, it's actually probably the first and last impression ultimately of the Storm IQ Tour 78U, which is that as is, it's not going to really be a go-to for house shots, but there's a lot to discuss in between. All right, so where do we begin? The IQ Tour 78U is supposed to be an answer to a question nobody raised. Well, I guess it's one that the PBA raised about urethane hardness, requiring all future balls classified as urethane start with a 78 hardness on the durometer hardness scale. You've probably all heard the background, but to recap, balls like the Purple Hammer that may start at 72 hardness get softer with time and use, up to 5 points, they say. So they hook a bit more as they soften up, and I guess that means they create a shape that's really hard to find elsewhere. I guess the latter point would be the only real relevant reason for any of this crap about hardness to matter. So the PBA has decided to require manufacturers to create new urethane balls with a harder shell so that as they soften up, they never get below the 72 on the durometer, which is the ultimate required minimum hardness. The harder a ball is, the more it will resist oil absorption, naturally go longer. I also want to point out that USB-C has decided to release comments without pomp and circumstance that they have no such rules for USB-C sanctioned bowling due to their data showing that it doesn't make enough of a difference that it softens, kind of saying, so what that it softens. I kind of asked the same thing, to be honest, considering how many type of ball reactions we have available. Maybe it's because urethane doesn't tend to work amazingly well on house shots anyway, and there is a huge likelihood that urethane with 78 hardness will even be more useless on typical house conditions. So, moving on a bit, different manufacturers have decided to address this via different solutions. Time will judge, I guess, who solved it better. But for Storm, they made a new urethane material that has 78 hardness to meet the requirement while attempting to have it still roll like modern urethane. Hammer, for example, decided to basically develop what they call NU, right? Not urethane ball, to mimic a urethane shape. Now, I don't have that here, but the hope is that it kind of mimics this ball shape with a non-urethane ball, and therefore don't have to meet that 78 hardness requirement. The difference between urethane and reactive, technically, is ultimately the plasticizer that's added to make reactive resin. There's actually a few great videos out there explaining this more technically. There's so much to uncork here, but I'd like to leave it here and just get on with what the balls do. Suffice to say, I would prefer USB-C maintains their current position, which will allow immensely more usable balls like the Pitch Black or the Purple Hammer to stay available to league bowlers. So now on to the testing of the IQ Tour 78U. As said, Storm says this is urethane that complies with the new PBA rules. Should that matter to the average bowler? In my opinion, no. My opening statement alludes to why. Essentially, you have a very hard ball that even with 500 grit kind of struggles to read the lane. I would actually say it looked better on 45-foot Dick Weber pattern I was bowling on this week, just to make the point. The 78U kind of, I would say, had us boxed in on a house shot, or should I say lasered into a very specific board or two to work on a house shot. The heavy outside friction just had the ball way overhooking. And once you get inside, the ball goes 60 feet. You can find that little sliver where there's just enough oil and friction to get to the pocket, but I would say the inconsistency of entry was noticeable, to be frank. I mean, it really tells the story of why urethane in general is not particularly conducive to a house shot shape. A house shot is designed with bone dry on the outside, very wet on the inside, creating a huge, what I'd say, a half pipe that funnels everything to the pocket. But when a ball has no reed in the middle and too much reed on the outside, it takes away all the room the house shot is designed to give you. And it's not like I couldn't get it to work at all, but it's unnecessary hard work. I mean, additionally, hard balls will still carry oil down lane, and urethane carry down is typically noticeable, so you dry up the fronts, muddy the end of the pattern, which can make for an extremely long night in transition. I'll highlight that any ball with low flare will damage the lanes this way, but most urethane balls to work effectively have low flaring cores in an attempt to conserve as much energy as possible since the cover starts so early. I understand Storm's design intent by trying to get a little stronger core in a hard urethane ball.
Oh, that's good.
But yeah, I mean, honestly, fairly meh for this house shot. To note, the IQ Tour 78U also lane shines a little faster than traditional urethane, so it's probably not quite true urethane in that sense, but slow enough oil absorption that it'll be classified under PBA rules as urethane. I actually think that more surface will be needed to make sense out of this ball. That going to 180 or 360 might make it look better, but it's definitely going to be chewing up the lanes, right? Now for Tyler, you'll see that he can do a lot more with the ball, even getting it to carry from beyond third arrow. I wouldn't say it looked fabulous, but he can get it to work. Or I should say he definitely needed to steer clear from the heavy friction and use his hand and the ball cover and core reed to get the ball to turn over. For me, I wanted the friction on the lane to do that. So if you watch some of the more direct shots, they turn over like crazy, and those are not fresh ball shots. It's not like, the first shot of urethane and it's sideways. I mean, this is like, on the contrary, it's actually after like at least the game's been on the ball. It's just how hard the surface and his rotation and rev rate read the pattern, or lack of existence of one on the outside of the lane. So he needed to find an area that was playable, that was closest to the third arrow. There is still mixed carry and drive, which is a challenge. Again, I don't think it's all bad, it's just unnecessarily tricky. Now Brian was next. There's a slight variation on the tale I've told already. Again, it's a little quick responding in the heavy friction, because friction on house shot is like 0 mils sometimes. But the concern was that if he got in, it just wouldn't drive. Now, although the reaction wasn't the prettiest, it did hit light and carry a decent amount, truth be told. So he had to belly it to the dry to get some reaction, but it did make that kind of very archy move for him. And to get it to work, he really had to try to flirt with playing it very high flush to high flush. And there is some benefit to urethane type control where it just arcs its way over to the pocket. Alright, so final thoughts. I really don't want to sound like I'm poo-pooing the IQ Tour 78U. I'm kind of poo-pooing the whole notion of forcing 78 hardness, but I'm not currently bowling any PBA tournaments, so who cares? I don't care. However, I do bowl almost exclusively on sport shots, except for these tests, and I would be very sad if I couldn't use my favorite urethane balls on them. I'm not certain if the manufacturers have had a good solution yet, although with time I imagine they will perfect the solution. But I would say for the house shot, I just see the 78U being very tricky and niche to use, and that's the bottom line.